Okay, so this morning, because it's just after Christmas, so Jim sort of suggested that I could look at the wise men, because they came to visit Jesus just after he was born, but we're talking on the topic of wise men and sort of realised that neither of us had much to add really about wise men. Not that well versed on it, so I don't think I'll be particularly long, and because we're only at 1:15, your dinners won't be burnt when you get home anyway. So I'll just read from Matthew chapter 2, verse 1 to 15. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler, he will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also. When they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, until it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And then when they had come into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. When they had opened their treasures, they presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, take the young child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I bring you word, for Herod the king will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night, and departed for Egypt, and until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken through the Lord's prophet, saying, Out of Egypt I called my son. So it's a story that we're all probably quite a lot of us will be well familiar with, but I just trust that God will maybe hopefully reveal something fresh to us out of it this morning. So Matthew and Luke are the only two Gospels that really tell us about the birth of Christ. And Matthew, he's the only one that covers the wise men. But they're quite interesting characters, I think, really, surrounded in a bit of mystery. We don't actually know that much about them. So it's perhaps a bit of a shame that it wasn't Luke who wrote about them, because he was sort of a bit more of a well-educated man. He was a doctor and perhaps more of a historian. So if he'd written about them, we would probably know more where they came from and some details about them. But yeah, like I said, they're a bit mysterious as it is, and who they are, we don't really know. One theory that I did hear when I was sort of preparing for this is that they might have come from Persia. They might have come from Persia, because the Persian Empire defeated Babylon in 540 BC, and there was sort of obviously the wise men there that Daniel would have worked with when he was in exile there. So someone that I heard thought maybe Daniel could have perhaps primed them to look out for the Son of God coming to earth, but that's just one possibility, and you can't really prove that because it doesn't tell us. So what we do know for certain, though, is that they came from the east, and that's east of Jerusalem, not east of here. It's all east of here. But why is it not more detailed? I was wondering, like, why is Matthew just satisfied with telling us east? So I think that perhaps in that sort of vagueness there's a little bit of a point to be made, because in the book of Genesis we see quite a lot of examples of people heading east, and that sort of symbolises turning away from God. So it's first in Genesis 3 with the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve sin, they have to get expelled from the Garden of Eden. But God, he places an angel with a flaming sword on the east of the garden to stop them coming back in. There's no way back to God once they've headed east. And then in Genesis 4, we've sort of now, by this point, we've got a bit of a appreciation that like wrong acts need some sort of punishment for them. So when Cain kills Abel, and he realises that there has to be some retribution for it, it says that he went out from the presence of the Lord and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So he travels east. And then over a few pages in chapter 11 of Genesis, it says that the people are migrating eastwards, and they find a nice flat plain at Babylon, and they decide that they'll build themselves a tower up to the heavens. So they try and storm heaven to get to the level of God, rather than waiting for God to bring heaven down to them. They literally try to elevate themselves up to the level of God, which we think sounds mad, doesn't it? But really, it's probably a very good physical picture of what we often do with other things in our life. We lift them up to the level of God. We make idols in our own lives. And then again, we see eastward movement when Abraham and Lot separate. Lot chooses to journey eastwards to the more fertile land near the Jordan, but he ended up settling near the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And these places, they were known for the fertile land, and the material properties and how good the crops would grow there. But in Sodom, the sin and sort of the moral depravity and how the way the people lived, the culture there, it was particularly egregious to the Lord. So, that's again heading east was getting away from God. And then lastly, the Israelites, after all this sin in the way they've been living, they ended up getting exiled to Babylon as a consequence of this constant moral corruption. And that's a nation geographically east of the promised land that they should have been heading for. So not that there's anything inherently evil about heading east, because in fact if you head east you end up back where you started, unless you fall off the end of the earth, I don't know. But I don't think you do really. But in the Old Testament there seems to be a clear sense or a clear symbolism that heading east is sort of where you go when there's moral decay and sinful behaviour. So it leads you away from God, and that, in many cases, in the Old Testament at least, seemed to be towards the east. So it seems remarkable, therefore, that the wise men came from the east. So I'm not wanting to read too deeply into this, but seeing as Matthew, or indeed the Holy Spirit, didn't give us more to go on actually where they came from, just the east, I think there's perhaps a point in that some of the first people that came to worship Jesus and actually recognise him as king and who he actually was were people from the east, symbolically a place of sin and exile and punishment. They had understood and they had come back. So the message here, I think, is this, that because the Lord has come, you can come back from exile. You can return from your place of sin and draw near to God because of what this child, who was, in the house by this point, what he would grow up to do on the cross and his resurrection. We who lost Eden through our disobedience can be made welcome. We have killed, probably not physically, but in our hearts we've hated people, haven't we? And it says that's as bad as killing. We've made idols of things. We've chosen to live in sin. We've lived in that land of Sodom and Gomorrah. We can come home and be made welcome. And we probably all know that no one can be truly happy and content until they have a good relationship with God, because that's how we were made. We were made for a relationship with him. A lot of you have probably seen an illustration where someone has a heart, and a big cardboard heart, and they cut out of it a cross, and they try and put money into it, or I don't know, a job or something like that, and everything just falls through, doesn't it? Until and then they'll put a heart up last, and obviously not a heart across, and it obviously fits. But you've probably all seen that illustration, and we can't be fulfilled until we've got the cross, we've got Jesus. So these wise men, they're in the east, they're in the place of symbolic sin, but when they came and saw Jesus with his mother, they fell down and worshipped him. And at this point, their lives, their purpose had been completely fulfilled. So even though geographically it says they went back to the east, spiritually speaking, they'd come home and they'd found the Lord. So having had a look at where the wise men came from, I also want to spend a bit of time looking at some of the verbs or the doing words that describe. Is that right? So, thank you. I googled that. I knew it was. Some of the words that are used to describe the wise men, to see what we can learn about them. So first it says that they came into the house. So we know that by the time the wise men come, it could have been a couple of years after, perhaps after the birth of Jesus. He was no longer in a stable, he was in a house. So it says, that's what it says in verse 11. Now these magi, these wise men, they were well-off people, and they'd probably never been into such a lowly house, really. They weren't kings, but in one sense they had all the money and they had all the prestige, so they were as good as kings. So they could have considered it beneath them, really. Like, if the king came to some council estate or something, he's probably not often get to go into many people's houses. The people come out to see him, don't they? The king doesn't go in to visit the people. So these wise men, they could have stood outside and said, "Oh, bring the child out. We'll have a look at him and see what we think." But they didn't. They went in. They realised that the one inside the house was much more dignified and much more worthy of praise than they were. So they went in and they entered his presence. And at this time of year, there's probably been a lot of people that would have been happy to come in and to a church or whatever and watch the nativity play, or maybe go to a carol service and enjoy the music and enjoy the singing, enjoy the quaintness of it all. But do they come in? Do they really enter in and draw near to Jesus? You see, when Jesus entered our world, and it says in Revelation that he stands at the door and knocks, waiting to be let in. But are we willing to let him in and come into the house like these wise men did? Or are we just wanting to stand outside and you know, get near but never quite get there? It's not just about knowing about Jesus, it's about actually knowing him and having a relationship with him. So Jesus tells a story in Luke 14, and I'll start reading at verse 15. It says, "When those who were at the table with him heard this, he said to Jesus, 'Blessed is the one who will eat at the feast of the kingdom of God.' Jesus replied, 'A certain man was preparing a banquet, and many invited guests. At the time of the banquet,'" sorry, I'll start again. Jesus replied, "A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell all those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, 'I have just bought a field and must go and see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I am on my way to try them out. Please excuse me.' Still another said, 'I just got married, so I cannot come.' The servant went back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered the servant, 'Go out quickly into the streets and the alleys of the towns and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind and the lame.' 'Sir,' the servant said, what you have ordered has already been done, but there is still room.' Then the master told his servant, 'Go out into the roads and the country lanes and compel them to come in, so that my house will be full. I tell you, Not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my banquet. So you see, the message of the gospel, it's quite clear that there's an invitation extended to you, and you've got to accept that invitation and enter in. You've got to draw near to Jesus and come into the house as the wise men did. So the second verb is, it says, maybe not second, but the second one we've got to look at is, it says that they saw the child. It says they saw the child and his mother Mary, and they worshipped him. And in a way, that's quite obvious. It would have been a simple house, like I said. It's not like it was a museum with many great artifacts and the Mona Lisa on one wall and the Bayeux tapestry on another wall, and they could have missed him. There was nothing else to see, really. But I think it probably means saw in a bit of a deeper sense. Instead of just saw with their eyes, they recognised him. Like, oftentimes you can see things but not quite see them, can't you? When you're looking for them. We were changing a socket wall panel thing yesterday, and I think we dropped one of the little plastic covers that cover the screws, and like some paint had chipped off. So it was on the floor with the paint, the same colour, and we could see it, but you can't quite see it, can you? Or like when you lose your car keys, you're looking for them, and you never quite see them, even though you're staring at them. And but these wise men, they recognised this child. In Matthew 16 we read this: when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do the people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But who do you say I am?" He asked. "Who do you say that I am?" But Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven." See, Peter, he hadn't worked this out, who Jesus was, through logic or by being the cleverest or what he had seen, but it had been revealed to him by God. And likewise, with these wise men, I don't think they just saw the child. I think it was revealed to them who he actually was. They recognised him as the sinless Son of God, the one that would go on to save the world. Because these wise men, they were important people. They don't just fall down and worship anyone. They recognised who this child was and what he would go on to do. So we need to make sure that we do the same, don't we? I think we see the Christmas cards and the nativity or whatever with Jesus led in the manger, but do we really realise, I think Paul's already sort of mentioned it a couple of times this morning, who he is and the significance of that and what his actions would buy us, bought our freedom and saved us from hell, ultimately, if we choose to accept him. So next, it says that they worshipped him. Note that Mary was also in the room, but they don't worship her. They only worship the child, and there's a very privileged position that Mary was in. But she's always, in Matthew's gospel anyway, if Mary and Jesus are together, he always puts Jesus first. It's always Jesus and his mother Mary or something like that. And there are some people, some religions nowadays, or even back then, who have a real problem with worshipping Jesus. Like nowadays, people will perhaps say they maybe even acknowledge that he came and was a real person, or they'll say that he was a good moral teacher. Some other religions will teach like that he was a prophet or whatever, but just one of many. But that you should only worship God. But Jesus, he is God, and he was God then. These other people would say that worship is only reserved for God, but these wise men, they notice something that many wise Jews in Jesus' time would miss. They saw that this was the incarnate Son of God who was worthy of receiving praise and worship. That's why they fell down and worshipped him. So it's quite possible that these wise men would have come from a culture where they worshipped many gods. I think that if that's the case, that makes them what we call polytheists. But it's very unlikely that if they were polytheists when they came, that they would have been when they left, because to worship Christ means to worship nothing else. He suffers no rivals. If you have in him as your number one, you can't have anything else. You can't share that place with anything else in your life. And then after they'd worshipped him, they opened their treasures. That's the next one. Opened. These were seriously rich men. We know this because they could afford to travel such a long way. And you might say, well, I've travelled all the way around the world, but this was in a pre-industrial age. There's a lot less people on the world. Everything was handmade. And that means that everything is always more expensive. Things take time to be made, and that just increases the cost. But the fact that they can afford to take like a year or two or whatever out of their normal lives, travel to wherever they're going, and bring these gifts, we can tell that they're rich from that. And just about the gifts, like we see on Christmas cards or whatever, it's like a little bottle of myrrh and a little box of gold or whatever. But they'd come to worship a king, hadn't they? They knew he was a king. They hadn't come to bring handouts to the poor. It's probably more realistic that they brought a lot of these gifts. They weren't get a skimp, I don't think. And we know as well that Mary and Joseph were quite poor, because when they went to, they had to do a sacrifice at the temple after Jesus had been born, and it said that they sacrificed 2 doves, which is like the sacrifice that you did if you were poor. Otherwise it was a lamb if you could afford it, but if not, it was 2 doves. But then after the wise men had been, they could afford a journey to Egypt and to stay there until Herod died in, I think it was 4 BC that Herod died. Before Christ. I think they must have got the numbers wrong. And then journey back. So they must, I may be guessing, but they must have got the money for this from somewhere, and possibly from the gifts from the wise men. So they opened up their treasures and worshipped him. They didn't just worship him by bowing down, but by giving him what they had. So what can we bring to God? Well, he needs nothing, and there's nothing that we can give him that's of any worth, really. Even our best things, it says, are as filthy rags to him. But despite all this, he does still desire us. He desires our company, and it's not because of what we can give him, but it's out of a deep love for us, which really, really changes the dynamic, doesn't it, I think, of a relationship. If someone just desires you for who you are, not because of what you can get, what they can get, rather. And then lastly, they returned. It says that the wise men departed. So was it a journey worth making? People maybe often say that they've been on a holiday of a lifetime, and you might think, don't do that, because where do you go from there? You've completed holidaying, but in truth it probably never really is it? There's always another holiday that you can go on, and something better to do. But what about these wise men? It might have been a question they asked on the way back. Was it worth it? It had cost them a lot. It might have even cost them respect of some of the other magi caste from where they'd come from. Because I doubt all the wise men from that place would have gone. Some of them might have said, it seems a long way, it's going to cost a lot, I'm not sure about this. So they might have lost some respect. And what were they expecting? They went to see a king. They were perhaps expecting to see the inside of a great palace, or to get like a bit of a guard of honour or something, meet with Herod, I don't know. But what did they get? They got a simple house with a child in it. And Jesus, as far as we know, he did no miracles. He spoke no great wisdom that they could take back to wherever they'd come from and write down. But what they did get, I think, is an understanding of this child, who he was. that he'd come to save men like them. And if we too can get this understanding, we'll be like the wise men. So let's just remember the wise men, that they entered in, they recognised, they worshipped, they gave, and they departed. So I'll just pray, and then we'll have a last song.